and I would like to hand over to David to address you on this subject. If you have questions, just put them in the chat and we'll give them to David when he's finished. Over to you, David. Please unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself. That's fine.
Okay, done. Thank you very much, Alan, and a very good evening to everybody. And I'm very delighted and honoured to be speaking to B'nai B'rith. It's a fine institution, and not many institutions have been going on longer than Ben Uri, because we were founded in 1915. But as Alan has just made clear, yours has, and that in itself deserves a great credit to you all. The subject tonight, the future of Jewish cultural providers, I'm afraid to tell you, is a bit like trying to make a sausage look interesting on a plate, or trying to find a baby's crying for an hour and a half lyrical. It's a very complex and serious subject, and usually I can throw in a few jokes here and there, but I'm afraid tonight it's going to be quite tough going. So I ask you to bear with me, because it really is a very serious subject. And it's a subject that you are all part of, because B'nai B'rith is in itself essentially a cultural organization, and you're part of and supporters of that. So please bear with me, and then interrogate me at your will throughout and at the end. The purpose of this presentation is to actually ask you and us to think differently about Jewish culture, Jewish cultural providers of Jewish culture, non-Jewish cultural providers of Jewish culture, of which there are many. The vehicles of engagement, of sharing and inspiration, the delivery and their cost options, your priorities for charity support and investment, and the best return on investment, recognizing that the number of philanthropists in our community are shrinking. So if you were hoping for a relaxing feet up, have a nice cup of coffee and a glass of wine and not have to do very much, I'm afraid to disappoint you, because this is, we're going to ask questions at the end as well. Okay, so let me deal with the post-COVID element. And basically post-COVID, please God, we will all be survive and be healthy for everybody. And there has to be an economic recovery. And there has to be an economic recovery, because if there isn't, then the amount of money that is left over from everybody spending to support charities will diminish. And that is not good news. So the Western democracies appear to be quite united that the economic recovery and turbocharged GDP growth, which is essential, will come from a green revolution. And any green revolution has to start with fresh air. And fresh air is the right of every human being. And you will see why, at the end of my presentation, why I refer to fresh air as such an important issue at the beginning. So the future of Jewish culture providers. Let's have some starting points, shall we? First of all, let's look at the demographics of the community. According to the last census, there was 250,000 Jewish people living in the UK. Some people argue that it's a little bit more, some people argue it's a little bit less, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll run with what the government and the census says. 250,000, over 150,000 of that 250,000 live in Greater London. Population rate is actually stable for the first time in many decades. And that's principally because the Haredi community have got a higher birth rate, and that balances off an aging community and a secular community has less children rather than more. So the community, as you know, is split between the ultra-Orthodox and the, let's just say, the more secular. And the secular side is shrinking and the ultra-Orthodox is increasing. It is estimated that by the 2040s, 50% of the Jewish population in the UK will actually be ultra-Orthodox. It will be from the Haredi community. And that in itself has significant implications, not just for Jewish life in total, but also for Jewish cultural life, because the ultra-Orthodox community see the religion as being the totality, if you like, and are not so engaged in the outside world where the wider aspects of culture play a part. So looking down the barrel of 20 years, there will be significant shift, and it will be progressive. There are around 400 synagogues in the UK, of which around 200 are in London. And let me just give you a very brief outline as to the financial state of Jewish culture providers. One of the most important Jewish sectors of the Jewish cultural providers is actually our newspapers. They provide our news. The Jewish Chronicle has been insolvent twice in the last 10 years and has recently been taken over. And let's hope that actually the new regime of management can do what the old regime couldn't, which is make it financially sustainable. As a business, and I'm going to come back to that, the Jewish Chronicle, in terms of its being unsustainable, just as, by the way, the Jewish News, which runs at an operating loss of over £1 million a year, are unsustainable as businesses. The Jewish Museum essentially went belly up at the beginning of the year. It lost money for every year since its development, lost money for 7 years in a row, lost cumulatively over £2 million, and eventually ran out of cash at the beginning of this year and required £1 million of public funds being as a bailout, and it's had more since. JW3 operates cash neutral. Cash neutral means that basically it washes its face. It has to work very, very hard to stay equal. So it doesn't lose very much, it doesn't gain very much. Ben-Uri is exactly the same situation. Over the last 19 years, we've also been, in round terms, cash neutral. I think we've averaged, £8,000 per annum as a surplus, and that excludes asset sales. But no serious surplus generated through that period. And LJCC, the London Jewish Cultural Centre, was actually absorbed into JW3 because it took out costs, brought in income, and eliminated a competitor. A very sensible, practical move. So the Jewish cultural providers, in terms of the sector, has been in a poor way for a very long time. So what is the future of the Jewish cultural providers? Well, let's just think and analyze from the ground up. What is our emotional engagement with Judaism? After all, we're talking about Jewish cultural providers, and I guess we're talking about Jewish culture. So what is our emotional engagement with Judaism? If I may say, and I include myself in this, that we are, generally speaking, a mature group that are sitting here meeting this evening. And it'd be interesting to see whether the attitude of the mature group is different from the younger generations. When I ask, what is the emotional engagement with Judaism? Has your or our Jewishness changed over the past 20 years? Has it increased? Is it roughly the same? Or has it decreased? How is it about our religious practice? In other words, not just our emotional engagement, but our religious practice, or our attendance to synagogue changed over the 20 years? Increased, decreased, the same? How has your charitable giving changed over the past 20 years in relation to your support, for example, for Israel? And I noticed, Alan, you were talking about the projects and the Israel Museum that I know extremely well. So you're obviously, B'nai B'rith is obviously deeply engaged with Israel. Which is terrific. But I'm interested to know whether, and I'm asking you to think, whether your charitable giving to Israel has increased or the same, or domestic Jewish charities increased or the same or decreased, or non-Jewish charities, domestic or charities, or emergency charities, whether it be cancer research or whether it be a tsunami, God forbid, somewhere. Has that increased as a proportion or decreased? Because all that actually has an effect. because it's the cumulative effect of our actions that actually direct, or create the direction of what's happening. In 2019, because this year is a COVID year, this is a bizarre year in our history. So we'll just talk about 2019. And I talk about choices. And I wonder how much time you've spent, what sort of percentage of your social time has been engaged with either the Jewish Museum or JW3 or Jewish Book Week or the Jewish Film Festival, which is on currently, or the Jewish Music Institute, or Spiral Arc, B'nai B'rith, obviously, the Ben-Uri, Jewish Renaissance magazine, the Jewish Quarterly magazine, which hopefully will come back soon. How much time are we engaging with these institutions? What sort of, then related to what sort of percentage of our charitable giving are we giving to Jewish organizations? I suspect that we give more as a percentage of our charitable giving than we do actually engage with these same charities. Could be wrong, but it's for you to have a think about. If I think about charities themselves in terms of to whom we give and to whom we support, I wonder what the percentage is and how it's changed over the years. So the Jewish charities, Jewish Care, Norwood, Jewish Blind, Jamie, World Jewish Relief, Chai, that raised £3 million. Chai Cancer raised £3 million in the last 36 hours. Tzedekah, the Haredi specific charities, compared to the generic charities that operate around us, Cancer Research, Alzheimer's Society, British Heart Foundation, MenCap, local hospitals and hospices, other health-related charities. And this is an extremely important point, because actually if you are faced, if you've got your last £100 or the £100 that you give to charity, do you give it to a cultural organization or do you give it to a health organization? Because that's the competition. Everything is about competition. What actually do we mean by culture? You know, we talk about Jewish culture providers, we talk about Jewish culture, but actually, what does it actually mean? What are we talking about here? Is Jewish culture, is it Jewish or British Jewish or Jewish Israeli or Israeli itself or secular? Does it matter what percentage is Jewish and what percentage is secular culture? I ask that question because, just as an aside, there's a Holocaust museum in America, and I'm sorry, I can't remember whether it's in Baltimore or Maryland or Miami. It's one or the other. And they just opened an exhibition about the killing of George, oh, I'm sorry, my name's gone, the gentleman that he was murdered by the police, and he couldn't breathe.
Floyd.
Sorry?
Floyd.
George Floyd, yeah. They just opened, so Holocaust Museum just opened an exhibition about that. So what percentage does it matter, and what percentage is Jewish, inverted commas, against secular culture? At what percentage of secular does a provider drop out of the Jewish category? So if you take Ben-Uri, for example, our focus, our intellectual focus in the art side is on the immigrant, the Jewish and immigrant contribution to British art since 1900. In numerical terms, it will be probably something like, by the time it's finished, which will be about 10 or 15 years, 40 to 50 to 1 non-Jewish to Jewish immigrants. Does that make us, does that weight of non-Jewish focus take us out of the category? I don't know, maybe. But what is Jewish culture ultimately? What is Jewish culture? Let me give you perhaps some examples and see whether this makes any sense to you. Well, first of all, I think there's a recognition and adoption of parts of our religion and customs. I don't see how I don't see how our culture can be separated from our religion. The lessons and ways of life from our religious sages' interpretations, whether it's Rashi or Shammai or whoever it is, these great sages of hundreds of thousands of years ago, created a Talmud to interpret life in a mode of living which is distinctly Jewish, and therefore surely must have an effect on culture. Our iconography, our ceremonial objects, our incessant need to analyze and debate, humor, a distinctive characteristic, surely part of our culture. Food must be part of our culture, surely. In fact, let me suggest to you that one of the greatest ambassadors of the Jewish faith in the secular world is none other than the great underappreciated bagel. Because a bagel is now part of everyday life. There are shops, little shops and cafes all over the world selling bagels. Don't say it's a Jewish bagel, but it's a bagel nonetheless. Family, community, health, education, literature, music, archives, art, the Benuri side, defined by relevant subject matter, but not by artist. Or should it be by artist? If the artist is Jewish, does that make him part of Jewish culture? History, our history, a minority's history, our vulnerability, our transient, in fact, of our history, the Holocaust, but yet our longevity, plus, and you will have others to add. Who is it for? That's the next question we need to ask. Who is our culture for? What is the culture providers doing for whom? Is it for the Jewish community? If it is, then we don't seem to be terribly interested in it. If you look at the actual visitor numbers and engagement numbers of the Jewish cultural providers, they are very poor. They are a small percentage of our 250,000. Why are we, what is it? What is the purpose of it? But if it's for the non-Jewish world, then what is the purpose of that either? Is it about interfaith? Is it about sharing experiences? Is it about greater understanding? Is it about combating anti-Semitism? Is it about supporting Israel? I'm asking the questions. I'm not giving you answers here. I'm just saying that if you're producing a product, surely one would want to know what on earth you're producing it for. I mean, at least we know that if you go into a supermarket and buy a bar of soap, it's to wash your hands 5 times a day at the moment. Or you buy, shampoo. Well, you know what shampoo is for, it's to wash your hair. But what is Jewish culture for? Why are we spreading it? Who are we talking to? Let's actually look at some of the obvious candidates as to Jewish cultural providers. And notice I talk about Jewish cultural providers. Well, the first obvious one is newspapers. I talked about it before, the Jewish Chronicle, the Jewish News, the Jewish Telegraph, the Jewish Tribune. Jewish publications, Jewish Renaissance, Jewish Quarterly, which, by the way, yes, hasn't been published for the last year and a half. Hopefully it's coming back. Jewish Museum London, Ben-Uri, if we are in this category, JW3, Jewish Book Week, Jewish Film Festival. But what about the Lubavitch? Are they not Jewish cultural providers? Perhaps the Lubavitch have done more to actually open the doors, open the eyes of people for Jewish culture than anybody else. Just imagine 20 years ago, would there be a Hanukkah in Trafalgar Square on the top of Hampstead Heath? Don't think so. Synagogues, not just for religious services, but their whole social program that they have. B'nai B'rith. And then the last one, which surely I think is the most important, is family. The example that we set to our children, who then set the same example to their children. And I'm incredibly proud that my daughter and her husband and her two, I'm going to be completely critically objective on this, two of the most amazing grandchildren that you could ever have. But every Friday night, irrespective of where they are, they make Shabbos. That's part of Jewish culture. So family should not be underestimated as a Jewish cultural provider. But let me talk about non-Jewish cultural providers, and then have a think about who actually produces more, who produces more content and engages more, let's say, customers. The British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, even the National Portrait Gallery actually lists 300 portraits of Jewish people. Whitechapel Art Gallery, through their archives, the British Library, the Bodleian Library, which, by the way, actually was the Leopold Muller Library of Jewish books, the Imperial War Museum, BBC Radio and Television, government and local authorities. Why government and local authorities? Because they fund Holocaust visits. BBC, because I don't think 20 years ago we would have had Chief Rabbi once a month on the Today program giving thought for the day. So the volume of non-Jewish cultural providers of Jewish culture is actually much stronger in every way than the Jewish community's cultural providers. Let me give you some numbers. One of the things that Ben Uri did in 2017, when we actually concluded that we weren't going to be blessed with an oligarch of whatever size, shape, or color, and from wherever he or she came from, who was going to give us £50 million to create a standalone museum of immigration and art and migration and identity. We decided that we actually were not going to be sustainable long term. We looked into our crystal ball and we didn't like what we saw. We'd looked there before and we hadn't liked what we'd seen before either, but nonetheless, this time we looked on the basis that we recognized that as trustees, we had to take action, because we didn't think that if we went belly up, that there would be anybody around to actually bail us out, because Ben Uri closed in 1996 and nobody came to bail us out and find a new gallery then. So we completely rethought how a small institution operates. And one of the things that we did, which is almost an anathema to the charity sector, is we introduced return on investment analysis. We made comparative assessments of how much benefit and how many people we engaged per different program. And if a program was generating a lot of interest and visitors and a lot of public benefit for X, and it was twice as good as Y, we took a very, very harsh look at Y and wondered whether we should be spending our money on it. And what we ended up doing was we stopped spending £50,000 a year on school education, because we were in London and Tate, the Royal Academy, the British Museum, the V&A, all these museums as well as smaller museums, were offering perfectly good schools education programs. And all we were doing was doing essentially, and we won 2 awards, by the way, for our children's education. It wasn't that we weren't any good at it, but it wasn't adding incremental or distinctive value. But when we looked at the work that we were doing with arts and dementia, we were distinctive, it was different, we were ahead of the curve, we were making a difference to people's lives that other people weren't making. And we were researching work that could pioneer new approaches to using art with older people living with dementia. And we used a return on investment analysis and stopped spending £50,000 on something that wasn't adding value and reinvested it in our Arts and Health Institute where it was. So let me give you some numbers. Jewish newspapers, Jewish Chronicle, Jewish News, Jewish Telegraph, Jewish Tribune. According to their accounts, in round terms, it costs £7 million a year for these 4 newspapers to actually operate. Okay? They're engaging, in terms of their sales, around 2.5 million people per year, 20,000 a week, just over. That actually, to impact that person, costs £2.60 per person per year. If you take Ben Uri, for example, if you take only our visitors to the gallery in 2019, it was costing £40 per person per year. If you added on how many people came to our exhibitions that we toured, it dropped down to £11 per person. The Jewish Museum costs £2.5 million a year to run. The numbers are extremely difficult to understand because they get, lots of numbers are flying around, but basically they had about 18,000 visitors that actually paid to go in. But let's say that they got another 60,000 visitors and school children and everything else. On that basis, at 75,000 visitors, which I think is really optimistic, it was costing £33 per person per engagement. JW3, £4.5 million to run, but it's engaging about 225,000 people. How many of that are serious intellectual engagements rather than people coming through the door for children's activities and everything else? I can't tell you, but let's say it was all intellectual engagement, costing £20 per person per annum. This is a completely different way of analyzing, yes, the investment and where you invest. And the reason why it's so important is because the charitable pool that we're all little fishes in is getting smaller. Or should I say, it's getting shallower. It may not be getting smaller, but it's getting shallower, because the amount of Jewish philanthropists whose principal focus is within the Jewish community has shrunk and will continue to shrink as our community becomes more emancipated and more integrated with the outside world. It's a completely different way of looking at things, but it actually is critically important if we are to start to jump ahead of the curve rather than continue to follow it and have situations where every X number of years, another Jewish institution requires bailing out. But there is one method of communication which is unbelievably cost effective, which is digital. It is where Ben Uri decided in 2018, after an extensive research program and options analysis and interrogating the strategy, that we decided to become a digital institution. And as the sign says behind me, the first full-scale virtual museum. It's benuri.org. You should go and have a look at it, where you won't just see one exhibition, you'll see 40 exhibitions. You won't see 10 works, you'll see 1,400 works. You won't see one video, you'll see 100 videos. You won't see 10 schools and family art programs, you'll see 200. You won't see 5 art programs for old people living on their own or living with dementia, you'll see 100. And if you want to see 100 years of archives, there's 11,000 pages on there, yeah, for you to look at and to search. But the power of the digital communication, let me just give you some random examples. And who would have thought it? The late and sorely missed Rabbi Lord Sacks, may his memory be the blessing that it is. His videos have been seen by 5.8 million views. 5.8 million views. Simon Schama, who is probably the most distinguished of our cultural historians and communicators, some 2 million views only on the story of the Jews. Not the rest of his books, only on the story of the Jews. You know what is the most effective, or was the most effective Holocaust education program? And it wasn't generated by the Holocaust Education Trust, who do an amazing job, as do all the cultural providers do an amazing job. Do you know who it was? I know you can't tell me, but I'm going to tell you who it was. It was Schindler's List. Schindler's List did more to educate the world outside about the Holocaust than any other program or museum that has ever been produced. And on YouTube alone, 9.6 million views. And remember, it's been in the cinema. It was the highest grossing film of its time in that decade. It's been on video, DVD. It's been on all the television networks and everything else. But I'm just talking about YouTube. And then let's talk about Jewish humor. Seinfeld. Does everybody know who Seinfeld is? 18 million views. I'm not talking now, I can't tell you about social media, but I can tell you that in all the social media platforms, there is Jewish groups, Jewish blocks, Jewish interests. And opera, ballet, concert, theaters, all produced filmed versions of their performances for movie theaters and TV, Sky Arts, plus BBC The Proms. So our life is changing around us. Digital is the future. You know, I started off by talking about post-COVID, and I talked about the Green Revolution, and I talked about fresh air. And the reason why I talked about it was because in 1960, Teddy Kollek had a furious argument with David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion, as you know, was the first prime minister of Israel, and the state was young and fledgling, and whatever money they had, which was coming in from outside, had to be invested in infrastructure. And Teddy Kollek said, we should build a museum. We should build the Israel Museum. We should have a museum that represents this country, Israel's past, present, and future, and Jewish culture. Ben-Gurion went mad and said, are you crazy? We've got no roads, we've got no schools. And the comment that swung it, the argument, was that Kollek said to Ben-Gurion, but culture is the fresh air of a civilized society. If we are to be a civilized society, we must have culture. It is the fresh air. And that's why I talked at the beginning about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution is about fresh air. Culture is about fresh air. But it costs. And is the Jewish community as a whole prepared to use our culture and our cultural providers and to fund them? Are the users prepared to fund an excessive fair value? And is the Jewish community prepared to pay for what it does not use? These are the key questions. But the Jewish cultural sector also has to play its part. And it has to be far more cost effective than it is. It has to be able to demonstrate that actually it offers equivalent, if not better value for money than many of our health orientations. And the way to do that is to jump the curve, to address tomorrow's problems today. The future is digital. Ben-Uri's future is benuri.org. The future of Jewish cultural providers. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David. I know that you want to have questions, and we can open up a discussion. If anyone has a question that they would like to, could you just put something in the chat column, and I'll come to you, or?
Well, they can speak out loud if they want.
Well, you have to speak out loud. I'd rather someone actually put their hand up, because there is a facility at the bottom of the chat where people can actually put the hand up, and it will show, and I will be able to see when I've scrolled through everybody. Just a minute. I can see that Tony Etherton has got his hand up. So Tony, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Somebody said that when they hear the word culture, they reach for their gun. I'm not quite sure what culture means. And it does seem that for a fairly small Jewish population of maybe 250,000, we have far too many cultural institutions and newspapers, and we're over provided for. And even if you go digital, how do you monetize it? How will it pay for itself? I'm not sure you've really thought this through. Your comments, please.
Okay, hello. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm glad that you haven't gone for your gun, because I'm hoping to still be around for a bit longer. So the answer is that, okay, so are there too many Jewish cultural institutions? Possibly. You know, consolidation is never a bad thing in any sector. Is the future digital? I think it is. How do you monetize it? Well, I think I would describe it as the following. First of all, I don't think anybody's actually yet been able to monetize a digital operation. The newspapers are the most obvious targets, if you like, in the fact that the digital newspaper is now taking over, from the physical, and it's very difficult to either charge for it or operate as a nation. But I think the answer is as follows. I think that we are a charity, and charities, if they are doing good work and making a difference, and it's a distinctive difference, it's not just repeating something that somebody else is doing, then I think charities can be supported. I think that's what people want to do with part of their excess funds. But I think it becomes very complicated in terms of the fact that if you take, for example, the Jewish Chronicle, as I say, is actually the most important, or certainly in numbers terms, outside the digital field, it is, for a certain age group, the most important sharer of Jewish culture in its widest format. But it's been tried to be operated as a business, and it's failed. But actually, as I quoted earlier on, it produces the most financially attractive cost per person per annum engagement out of all the different institutions that I mentioned. And maybe if the Jewish Chronicle was considered to be a charity and to be able to generate an appeal for charitable funds, then it wouldn't have been insolvent twice. So I think there is a fair argument, and it's certainly an argument that we are going to use, in the fact that the work that Ben-Uri does, whether it's the Art and Health Institute or it's a research unit for the recording the contribution of the Jewish and immigrants to British art since 1900, I think these are distinctive, valuable commodities in terms of adding to the overall picture and culture of our country and our community. And as a charity, we're entitled to be supported. We're not entitled to anything, but you understand, it's a fair formula to ask for support. So I think charities should be able to ask for support and generate support if they are producing distinctive public benefit in a very cost-efficient manner. And I think that's as good a rationale for supporting a charity as any I know.
Fine. Well, we have 4 more questions lined up for you, David. I'd like first to go to Miriam Moritz. Miriam, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thank you, David. It was very interesting. I really agree with your analysis of everything, but I have a question about the actual physical artifacts, the paintings and sculptures, which you used to have. I know you had to sell some of them off. The ones that you haven't sold off, I assume they're in store. But when you see something on Zoom, online, on the internet, it's like looking at something in a book. It's not the same as seeing the real thing. We live in Manchester, so we couldn't be popping into the physical Ben-Uri gallery if we wanted to. It wouldn't be an option for us. But we did go down to London a few years ago, and we saw your wonderful exhibition at Somerset House, and we enjoyed it so much. And I do think that you do lose out by not seeing the real thing. What's happened to the paintings that you have got? I mean, are they all in store? Most museums and galleries, even if they have a wonderful building, they never have enough space to display everything. There are more items in store in all art galleries and museums that are ever on the walls. I know that because I've worked in museum. So I just wondered what's happened to your actual paintings and sculptures.
Well, first of all, I think we sold so far 26 different works out of near enough 1,500. But we are deaccessioning around 600 works. And these 600 works, in principle, have rarely, if ever, seen the light of day, and in some cases across 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And in fact, and 2 of the works that we actually sold, we'd had for nearly 100 years, and had only been exhibited twice or 3 times. And it went back to return on investment. What was the return on investment that the public can generate or benefit from by having a piece of artwork in a store that is never seen, compared to using that money intelligently, sensibly, and productively, so that there actually does generate a public benefit? So the answer to your question is that we've still got the 99.99% of our collection intact. We will, over the coming 3 years, we will give life to a third of it. Works, as I say, that are sitting there gathering dust and never seen, but we have them all digitized. They are online. And I do want to just talk about this wonderful, repeated idea that it's just not the same. And you're absolutely right. It's just not the same. But if you live in Manchester, it don't matter because you can't see it. But if you can see it online, it's a damn sight better than nothing.
Or if it's going on loan, if you're loaning any of them, say to you.
Yes, yeah. But the point that you made earlier is absolutely right. Do you know that 90% plus of all museums' collections are in store,
I know that.
and 90% plus of the works that are in store never come out.
That's
So-
the advantage of working in an art gallery, because you can go into the stores and
It is, and our store is in Wiltshire, in the middle of a hill, and it looks like a James Bond organization. It was in Wiltshire, and there's nothing more exciting than going through the store. But in terms of public benefit,
Yeah.
I would argue that what the national galleries should be doing is distributing works that are in their store because it's not good enough to be seen, and putting them into Accrington, and putting them into Wincanton, and putting them into Falkirk, and I'm probably going to get into terrible trouble from.
There was a program a few years ago. I can't remember. It was a national gallery, where it was coming from, and it was they were going around because there were things we saw in Manchester which were on loan.
Yes.
To national London.
Yes. Yeah. But Miriam, one picture here, one picture there. We're talking about thousands of pictures, and we're talking about institutions that actually would give their right arm to have a picture of high quality. It may not be high quality to the National Gallery, and the works that we sold and the works that we will dispose of are not the highest quality, because we've got better examples. And if you've got a better example, that's the one you show, because that's the one that people want to see. So it's a question of not whether you can have the best, it's whether you can provide the second best, because anybody living outside London can't see our collection. I mean, we've toured 30 exhibitions across 3 continents, but we're still, it's a pinprick. It's a pinprick. We need to spread our cultural heritage, and we need to spread our cultural treasures so that people across the country can see it. Why should people living in 200 miles from London not have the same benefit of people actually living in London? Yeah. Talking about the government, talking about balancing up the north, let's balance up the culture. Let's get great works to places that don't have them.
Thank you. Michael Reek.
Michael Wright, yes. Hello, David. Nice listening to you again. Last time we saw each other at JW3. Very much a different subject, but intertwined to what you've been talking about. The Jew, where the Jew comes from, biblical times, is very much part of world art, whether it be in terms of sculpture from Michelangelo, from Rembrandt. If we look at the Jewish Bride, for instance, music, you can see various concerts being put on, etc. I wonder, does one consider putting on exhibitions, not just by Jewish artists, but particularly exhibitions about how the Jews have fashioned the world? I think we go to all the art galleries and we see Jews in situ, but we don't see it as a major exhibition. I wonder if it's something that could be put together.
Well, thankfully, we're blessed with a team of great curators. And in fact, one of our great scholars has been very recently appointed, Sarah McDougall has recently been appointed as director of Ben-Uri, and I will certainly pass that on to her. If we do something like that, it would be digitally, it would be virtual, so that instead of having 7,500 people a year visiting the gallery, we're getting 25,000 people a week. Sorry, a month, I beg your pardon, a month engaging. We do, as you know, exhibit non-Jewish artists all the time, as long as they fall into the category of the immigrant contribution. We have no, we're not interested at all from a critical point of view as to where they come from, except for the research unit obviously does in terms of other countries. So the answer is I will pass that message on, Michael, and it's a very interesting thought.
I just thought something different. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Gordon. Ruth.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask something very quickly. This may be a silly question, because possibly everybody knows the answer, but how, if you have a virtual museum, how does this bring funds into the museum? I mean, do people pay to access this digitally or
No.
virtually? So how does the money
because it's a straight charitable exercise. And what we're trying to do is that if you think about it, the definition of a charity is to generate public benefit. That is a legal definition of what a charity is supposed to do. If it doesn't generate public benefit, it has no right and shouldn't be a charity. Generating public benefit from a museum's point of view, and we are an educational establishment, is to share our experiences, our knowledge, our artworks, our possessions, our treasures with as many people as possible.
Yeah.
So by converting into a digital institution, we've multiplied by so many times, and we're only just started. I mean, we've only really launched Benary.org 4 months ago, so it's just a soft launch. If we achieve in creating a situation of going from 10,000 a year to 1.5 million a year, that's 1.5 million more people that could be interested in supporting us. And equally, the national institutions, the national grant giving bodies should be far more interested in supporting an institution that has transformed itself to be able to generate engagement with 1 million people a year rather than 10,000. So it's a bit of an act of faith, but let me tell you, we never managed to generate that much money from our existing physical bodies.
Yeah.
You know, we had 30,000 people. This was a critical point in our history. We had 30,000 people visit that extraordinary exhibition that we put on for our centenary at Somerset House.
Yeah.
Do you know how much money we generated in donations? Not a pound a head. Not a pound a head.
But one paid to, and it came locally to Bushy, isn't it? The same exhibition was in Bushy.
No, it was a very different exhibition in Bushy.
Oh,
but,
I thought both. Okay.
But it was.
But one paid at Somerset House.
No, you didn't. We didn't charge.
Oh.
No, we didn't. No, that was part of the whole thing. And the Heritage Lottery Fund supported that whole principle and actually gave us £400,000 towards the 500,000 that it cost.
Okay.
Right.
But it's going back to the original concept of a charity. A charity is an organization that generates public benefit, that generates good, and other people who have got excess funds available, if they appreciate that, will want to support them so that they can generate more good.
I see.
I
Thank you.
think the issue of charities and self-sustainability has become a little bit confused at the edges.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question now from Margaret Summers. Margaret, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
It's actually David.
Carry on.
Okay. You talked a lot about culture, and every now and then the word education comes in. I feel sometimes the word culture should be replaced by the word education. I wonder if that might help in promoting what you're doing, because it isn't in fact what you're doing, whether it's digital or physically, whether it's in a museum or reading the newspaper, more down the education route. And would that not then garner more dollars, as you might say?
Well, the answer is yes, but I think that I'd like to just deal with the two words. Culture, if you like, is a noun, and education is a verb in our language. So we're educating, if you like, and what we're educating is culture in its biggest format, in its widest format. So I'm not sure how much. Sorry, come back at me, David.
No, carry on. I'm listening very carefully. Go ahead.
I'm not sure whether education as a sexy terminology to generate more funds will be so successful. I mean, there is educational grants and everything else. I mean, it is what we do. But I haven't given it any great thought, but I will. You know, if you hear us talking about the fact that we're educators, you can sit back and have a smile.
Right. Well, can I therefore follow on from that?
Sure.
I'll then go into something very specific and perhaps somewhat more controversial, in that the Holocaust Memorial Project to be installed next to the Houses of Parliament Is that cultural or educational?
Well, I think it's educating, and I think the Holocaust is part of our broader, wider culture. But I'll respond back, if I may, in equally controversial terms. I'm one of the few people that actually submitted a paper suggesting that we actually could invest £100 million very much more effectively than building a huge monument in Parliament Square, which in 10 years' time, nobody's going to know or remember what it's for. When actually the anti-Semitism, which is surely what this is about, the anti-Semitism is not in Westminster. And I would much rather be spent £20 million, yes, on some edifice by whatever it is, make that very nice. I'm not sure that we need an education centre. We have the Imperial War Museum. We've got the Holocaust Education Trust. But where is there impact in towns and cities across the northwest of England, which has got real social integration problems, where that money could be spent, I think, much more effectively. So, I was hoping that might be controversial, but I think you're agreeing with me, David. So,
yeah. Well, yes, indeed.
Both are.
I think we share a common name as well. So I fully agree with you. I think it's the wrong thing in the wrong place and should be done in a different way, totally.
It would be a whole evening on its own. And for
Yes.
the final question, before we go to the liquid place, I'm going to ask Zoe Abrams to ask her question, please.
Hello, sorry, my camera's not working right now. I do apologise. Thank you very much for the very interesting and illuminating talk. I was wondering about how much, did other digital platforms figure into your strategy? And similarly, how much are you engaging with younger audiences figures into your priorities? And then kind of lastly, and kind of entwine with other people's questions, when you're designing the actual website, how much did you think about how to cater to people's desire to, for close looking, engaging with the object on a very material level? How was that figuring in your strategy? Thank you very much.
thank you. Well, Zoe, you signed as, I might be a little bit older than you, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm 23.
You're 20, oh, of course, I'm at least 10 years older than you. Okay, so the digital strategy I will share with you. I want you to imagine, are you from London? Most people know Marble Arch in London.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, most people know what the North Circular and the South Circular is.
Yeah.
Okay. So the strategy is that benary.org is Marble Arch. And what we have is we've got service stations all around the North and South Circular, which are at least 20, I think 21 actually, different digital programs and platforms. And we are there, our collections are there, our programming is there, right across, whether it's Issuu, where you can read our catalogs, or Vimeo, or YouTube, or Instagram, or IGTV. I hope you're impressed, Zoe, that I know all these things.
Very impressed.
I'm impressed that I know them all. What else? We've got TikTok, the whole range of different Reddit, Artsy, Art UK, a whole range of different platforms where we communicate and engage. So, and the idea is that this engagement through these platforms will be sufficient to entice or seduce the viewer to then go along that tributary to benary.org in Marble Arch. So we've circled benary.org, we've circled Marble Arch in the North and South Circular. Imagine the service stations all around it. Benary is there, and it brings you to the center. So if we take Instagram, which is a program for the younger generation, I think we generate about 4,500 impressions per post. Impressions, for those of you like me who are not necessarily familiar with all these terminology, that's in business, that's called brand awareness building. It's people getting to understand what your brand is, what the title Benary is, and what it stands for. We also do IGTV, which is the Instagram short video version. It's, and we've created something called 60-second Insight, which is a Ben-Uri invention. And it's 60 seconds about an artist. And that does exceptionally well on IGTV. And you know, I have daily meetings with my different digital colleagues across these things, and I can't remember what the latest digital platform that they were discussing about whether we should go. But the answer is that we're very interested in young people, but of course young people have got different aspirations and interests. Or you also talked about the physical. So if you go to the Ben-Uri collection, you go onto benuri.org, then go to collection, you'll then find every single work is high resolution digitally reproduced with a zoom capacity. So you can zoom in and out and actually see in many cases the actual paintwork, the actual brush strokes. There is an artist biography on every artist in the collection. So the actual handling, inverted commas, digitally, the products is something that we desperately encourage you to do, but we also want you to learn about the artist and learn about the context of the artwork. Okay. Does that help, Zoe? Have I answered your questions or not?
Very well, thank you very much.
Yes, are you sure?
Your camera working, okay. Thank you. Well, time is pressing on now. And we don't actually have any time for any more questions. I'm sorry for anyone else that's just put the hand up. And I'd like to turn to Valerie Bello, who is the chairman of the Benabrith UK Heritage Committee, who is going to propose a vote of thanks. Over to you, Valerie. Valerie? Hello? Valerie? Valerie? I can't, no, she's online. I don't know where she is. Valerie Bello, are you still there?
Yeah.
Well, Valerie, I can't shout any louder. Well, it looks like Valerie isn't there. So on behalf of us all, David, may I thank you most sincerely for an excellent talk and discussion. I've looked at the Ben-Uri collection online. It's absolutely excellent. As someone has said, it's you can't beat seeing these things in the flesh, so to speak, but you have to be realistic. You can't continue losing money and then nobody sees anything because it's all sold off. So I wish you really good luck on the project. I'd like to invite everybody to unmute themselves and show our appreciation to David, and we'll show our appreciation to the Ben-Uri Art Gallery by going online and hopefully supporting it. So,
Thank you.
She froze. I think Valerie froze. Yeah.
She's fallen asleep. Valerie's fallen asleep. That's what it is. I can see her. She's asleep.
okay. Thank you, everybody.
Can I just make one? Alan?
Yes.